Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here with you today to attend this event on the sidelines of the first week of the 69th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. I thank the Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See to the United Nations in New York for the kind invitation, and Allies Defending Freedom International for co-organizing this meeting on sex-selective practices. On the occasion of the third anniversary of the Fourth World Conference on Women and the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, we have the opportunity to reaffirm our shared commitment to promote effective equality between men and women, and to eliminate all forms of discrimination and violence against women, which are always an obstacle to justice and peace. Sex-selective practices against girls, both before and after birth, are still today a widespread issue in many regions of the world, despite the Platform for Action adopted in Beijing condemned this gravest form of violence and suppression of human life. Female pre-implantation selection, selective abortions, female infanticide, dowry-related murders, and lack of care for girls and mothers in the postnatal period are the most common. Recent studies published in prestigious international scientific journals report that if we do not take adequate action measures to stop sex-selective practices, there will be a deficit of more than 4.7 million women and girls between 2021 and 2030. In this sense, a silent female genocide is taking place. Entire populations of unborn girls are being eliminated simply because they are girls. It seems noteworthy that in some countries where such practices have been used for decades and are now severely affected by sex imbalances at birth, the sex ratio is likely to decline, but falling fertility rates, aging of societies, and a persistent preference for the male child are clear signs that the problem has not been tackled at its roots. As Pope Francis said, these roots are cultural and spiritual, growing in the soil of prejudice, of possessiveness, of injustice. It is important to say it like it is. The selective killing of women is feminicide. That is, the killing of women because they are women. In the face of threats to human life, the commitment of the international community is strong and effective when it focuses on the issues at hand in a timely manner and uses simple, clear and common language. In this case, it helps us to make sex-selective practices against women more visible so that they are not perceived as distant or theoretical issues. Having said that, I would like to draw your attention to three fundamental issues. First of all, sex-selective practices in themselves raise relevant ethical and legal issues since they consist in the systematic suppression of human life before and after birth. Such practices are highly discriminatory and an unjust form of public and private biopolitical control over certain persons whose dignity and basic human rights are effectively denied. For this reason, sex-selective practices are prohibited by several national legislations. However, there are countries where they are still practiced and even legally permissible and socially tolerated against girls and women for medical, social, economic, or inheritance reasons, family balancing reasons, or self-determining reasons on the part of couples. In countries where sex-selective practices are banned, some preference continues to be to be seen as a rational choice and ends up justifying sex differential treatment of offspring. Laws have generally failed to be effective, especially in rural areas or among lawless groups, such as ghettoized migrant workers in cities, despite education efforts. Indeed, subtle male privilege is still present in many social structures. That's why we have to recognize that even today, as the Beijing Platform for Action stated in 1995, discrimination against women begins before birth. The issue is much more complex than it seems and has huge implications. In countries where a sex demographic imbalance has been identified, these practices led to the spread of trafficking in women, for instance, for men who cannot pay a dowry or who cannot find a spouse because of the demographic imbalance between men and women, but led also forced prostitution, child marriage, reproductive coercion, polyamory, domestic violence, discrimination against daughters in health and nutrition. In this sense, violence against women has been documented as a pervasive global phenomenon and a significant violation of human rights. Secondly, access to modern reproductive technologies and to legal abortion is a major contributor to the spread of such practices, encouraging reproductive tourism from those countries that prohibit sex selection, including among couples with high average levels of education. Sex-selective technologies combined with limited restrictions on abortion make it much easier than in the past for couples with a strong preference for sons to resort to sex-selective abortion. In fact, it can be used not only in the case of X-linked diseases, but in the presence of any form of risk to which a selective choice can be linked to the use of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, prenatal diagnosis, and female feticide. Insofar as advanced reproductive technologies remove the moral turpitude of sex-based selection by reframing it as a scientific endeavor, they make it an issue of justice in relation to missing girls. The selective mentality, the abundance of embryo produced in vitro fertilization cycles, which encourages any kind of selection, the alleged right to a child, regrettably legitimized by some ruling of national and international courts, which can give rise to different legal claims, even with regard to the characteristics of the child, result in a form of discrimination and violence against those who are discarded. However, the discerning jurist knows that there is no right to child in the strict legal sense that can justify any procreative practice, especially when it comes to the power to kill children before and after birth. The legitimization of any form of suppression of human life expresses an imbalance of rights that is openly denied to those who are most fragile, voiceless, little girls still hidden in their mother's womb or under observation in vitro. This is the main problem. The widespread legal liberalization of abortion removes any possibility of restricting selective practices during pregnancy, which can be easily disguised by using abortion for any purpose and on the basis of any prejudice. We should bear in mind that there is a scarcity of data in this area to enable us to make real estimates of the impact of these practices on the phenomenon of prenatal female selection. In fact, it is not uncommon to find underreporting of both female births and female selection practices all around the world. This is a serious legal issue. that requires urgent consideration by states and international bodies in order to more effectively prohibit such practices. The dry debates in the ethical medical literature on the need to find well-founded utilitarian reasons to prove the harm caused by these sex-selective practices in order to prohibit them are confronted with the evidence of the facts. Such practices are not only an instrument of selection of the human being per se, but also of very serious violence and discrimination against women and a violation of their fundamental human rights, first of all, the right to life. Third issue, prenatal female selection and infanticide are heinous crimes against motherhood, which destroy women's freedom to be mothers and deprive them of a profound anthropological dimension such as maternal identity, as stated in the Beijing Platform for Action. Many kinds of psychological pressures may translate in coerced abortion. In some countries, it is still a social norm for the family to force the pregnant woman to have an abortion, and if she does not cooperate, she faces domestic violence. In this way, the desired family is produced at the expense of daughters and mothers. In this sense, sex-selective practices have been defined as a crime of silence, a taboo. They underlie a complex reality of oppression, inequality, and abuse. They are the last act, a decision that grows out of a mentality in which the human being is made the object of the decisions of others. The question refers to the gaze, the way in which we, as an international community, look at the human being. To see personal, social, economic advantages or disadvantages in the life of a girl is to attribute to women a mere utilitarian value, subject to cost-benefit evaluation by third parties. It is contrary to respect for the human dignity to reduce the person to waste material. Human reason alone, now supported by scientific evidence, is sufficient to recognize the value of every human life from conception. The preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights also affirms that dignity is inherent to all members of the human family. Inherent means that it does not depend on birth, but belongs to every human being from the first moment of his or her existence, and it is intrinsic to the person. It permits no distinction or discrimination, and it is the basis of the right to life of every human being. Any form of anthropological reductionism is a serious threat to respect for fundamental human rights, which can be relativized and applied in a discriminatory manner from case to case. In the same way, any exception to the principle of respect for human life constitutes a breach into which, by analogy, other very serious forms of selection and violence against the human person, especially against women, can creep. The progress of humanity has now made us acutely aware of the shared responsibility and duty we have politically, legislatively, socially, and culturally to intervene effectively where women are still invisible and lost, before and after birth. No child can be considered a mistake or guilty of existing. Today, we are struggling to understand the gravity of these crimes, especially when they are linked to abortion, the perception of which has gradually been erased from the collective consciousness. The international community must therefore feel called to reflect on the urgency of establishing a universal ban on all forms of sex-selective practices, both before and after birth, and to call for action even on those laws that by liberalizing abortion, have effectively removed sex-selective practices from any possibility of control. The human rights system is above any national law, and with regard to sex-selective practices, the entire international community must make a coordinated and concrete commitment to recognize what remains to be done to ensure that the right to life of girls before and after birth is respected. It will be necessary to change social and economic paradigms, as well as to promote educational and behavioral models that will help to change stereotypes and prejudices in the new generations, valuing reciprocity and equality between men and women in every stage and circumstance of life, within and outside the family. Changing is essential if we are to lay together the foundations of a more fraternal world, not only among peoples, but also between men and women. In his address to members of the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See this year, Pope Francis called up each of us to be heralds of a diplomacy of hope. The dense clouds of war of which he spoke are about the arduous struggle of humanity to defend human life against all kinds of weapons, including those of sexual selection. These clouds can be swept away. This means working for an international law that respects the right to life of every human being from conception to natural death. It is in the folds of this fragile right that violence against women still creeps in today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gambino.